There comes a moment in life when a person no longer recognizes themselves, not physically, but internally. You wake up tired, even after sleeping. You feel heavy, even when nothing terrible has happened. You smile around people, but feel empty when you are alone. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin abandoning yourself. Not in one dramatic moment, not in a single failure, but in tiny daily betrayals. Every time you stay silent when something hurts you. Every time you accept less than you deserve. Every time you break promises to yourself. Every time you allow fear to control your choices. Little by little, your self-respect disappears. And the dangerous part is this: most people do not even notice it happening, because losing self-respect is silent. It hides behind fake kindness, behind people-pleasing, behind overthinking, behind being understanding, behind constantly sacrificing yourself just to keep others comfortable. But eventually, the soul becomes exhausted, because deep down, every human being wants one thing more than approval. They want to feel worthy in their own eyes. Welcome to Habit Hustle. And today, we are going to talk about the 7 signs you have lost self-respect before your identity completely disappears. Because once self-respect dies, everything else begins to collapse with it. Your confidence, your discipline, your boundaries, your peace, your future. So listen carefully. Some of these signs may hurt, but sometimes pain is necessary, because truth is what wakes a sleeping mind. Sign number 1. You constantly seek validation from others. A person who respects themselves does not need applause to feel valuable. But when self-respect is weak, you begin depending on other people to tell you who you are. You post something online and anxiously wait for likes. You over-explain your decisions. You constantly seek reassurance. You feel emotionally affected when someone ignores you. You crave approval for everything, and without realizing it, you hand your self-worth to strangers. This is one of the most dangerous habits a person can develop, because the moment your happiness depends on external validation, you become emotionally controlled by everyone around you. One compliment can make your day. One criticism can destroy your confidence, and suddenly, your emotions are no longer yours. You become a puppet tied to people's opinions. Stoic philosophy warned about this thousands of years ago. The moment you prioritize public approval over inner peace, you lose freedom, because now your identity belongs to the crowd. Think about how many people today are exhausted, not because life is hard, but because they are constantly performing confidence, performing success, performing happiness, trying desperately to be accepted. But acceptance earned by abandoning yourself is not peace. It is emotional slavery. Real self-respect begins when you stop asking, "Do they approve of me?" and start asking, "Do I approve of myself?" Because the truth is, people's opinions change every second. If you build your identity on their approval, your confidence will collapse every time the crowd changes direction. And crowds always change direction. One day they praise you, the next day they criticize you, the next day they forget you even existed. That is why self-respect must come from within. Not from followers, not from friends, not from relationships, not from society, but from your own standards, your own discipline, your own integrity, your own character. The strongest people in the world are not those loved by everyone. They are those who remain loyal to themselves even when misunderstood. Sign number 2. You allow disrespect because you fear. Losing people, this sign destroys millions of lives, and most people tolerate it for years. When you lose self-respect, you start accepting behavior that damages your soul. You tolerate insults. You tolerate manipulation. You tolerate being ignored. You tolerate emotional abuse. You tolerate broken promises. Why? Because you are afraid. Afraid of losing someone. Afraid of being alone. afraid of rejection. So instead of protecting your dignity, you sacrifice it. Little by little, you convince yourself they didn't mean it. They're just stressed. It's my fault. I should be more understanding. But deep down, you know the truth. A person who truly values themselves does not beg for basic respect, and they certainly do not remain where they are repeatedly dishonored. But when self-respect disappears, even toxic relationships start feeling normal, because the fear of loneliness becomes stronger than the love of self. And this is where people lose themselves completely. They shrink their personality to keep others comfortable. They suppress emotions to avoid conflict. They stay silent to avoid abandonment, until eventually, they no longer know who they really are. Listen carefully. Loneliness is painful, but losing yourself to keep someone else is even more painful. At least, loneliness gives you space to heal. But disrespect slowly destroys your identity from the inside. Every insult you tolerate teaches your mind, my feelings do not matter. Every boundary you abandon teaches your soul, I am not important. And eventually your inner voice becomes weak. This is why boundaries are not selfish. They are necessary. Boundaries are the language of self-respect. They tell the world, I know my worth. And people who become angry when you create boundaries were often benefiting from your lack of them. Never forget that, because some people only love the version of you they can control. The moment you develop standards, they disappear. And that is not loss. That is freedom. Sign number 3. You break promises to yourself repeatedly. This is one of the clearest signs of lost self-respect. You tell yourself, I'll wake up early tomorrow, but you don't. I'll start exercising, but you delay it again. I'll stop wasting time, but hours disappear every day. I'll change my life, but nothing changes, and eventually, your mind stops trusting you. Think about that carefully. Every time you break a promise to yourself, you damage your relationship with your own mind. You teach yourself that your words have no value, that your goals are meaningless, that your discipline is weak, that your future is optional. Most people think confidence comes from motivation. It does not. Confidence comes from self-trust. And self-trust is built when your actions match your words, when you say, I will do this, and then you actually do it, even when you do not feel like it. That is how self-respect grows. Not through motivation videos, not through inspiration, not through dreaming, but through keeping small promises consistently. Because every kept promise tells your brain, I can rely on myself. And that changes everything. The problem today is that many people want the feeling of confidence without earning it. But confidence is earned privately, in the moments nobody sees, when you wake up instead of snoozing the alarm, when you work while others procrastinate, when you stay disciplined despite discomfort, when you continue despite excuses. That is where real pride is born. And without discipline, self-respect slowly dies, because deep down, you know when you are lying to yourself, and the soul suffers every time it happens. Sign number 4. You apologize for everything. There is nothing wrong with apologizing when you make a mistake. But people with low self-respect apologize even when they have done nothing wrong. They apologize for expressing feelings. They apologize for saying no. They apologize for taking space. They apologize for existing authentically. Why? Because deep inside, they feel like a burden. And this mindset is dangerous, because when you constantly apologize for who you are, you unconsciously tell yourself, my existence inconveniences others. So you begin shrinking yourself. You speak less. You hide opinions. You suppress needs. You avoid attention. Not because you are peaceful, but because you fear rejection. This creates a painful cycle. The less you express yourself, the weaker your identity becomes. And the weaker your identity becomes, the more approval you seek.
until eventually you become whatever other people want you to be. But a life spent performing for acceptance is not a real life. It is survival. True self-respect means understanding this. You do not need permission to exist confidently. You do not need to apologize for having standards. You do not need to apologize for protecting your peace. You do not need to apologize for saying no. No is not cruelty. Sometimes, no is self-respect speaking for the first time in years. And many people will dislike the new version of you once you stop over-explaining and over-apologizing. That is normal, because people become comfortable with the version of you that never challenged them. But growth changes relationships, and sometimes losing approval is the price of finally respecting yourself.
Most people think self-respect disappears suddenly, but it does not. It fades quietly, like a candle slowly burning out in a dark room. And by the time many people notice it, they already feel emotionally exhausted. They no longer feel powerful. They no longer trust themselves. They no longer recognize the person staring back in the mirror. Why? Because when self-respect disappears, life becomes survival instead of purpose. You begin living for approval instead of truth, comfort instead of growth, attention instead of peace. And the worst part is this: the outside world may never notice. You may still smile, still post online, still laugh with friends, still look successful, but internally, you feel disconnected from yourself. That emptiness is not random. It is the soul warning you that you have abandoned your own dignity for too long. Welcome back to Habit Hustle. And here are the final signs you have lost self-respect before life completely drifts out of your control. Sign number 5. You constantly people please. Even when it hurts you, this habit destroys more lives than people realize, because people-pleasing looks harmless on the surface. You appear kind, helpful, understanding, easygoing, but underneath, there is often fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of disappointing others. So you constantly sacrifice yourself to keep everyone happy. You say yes when you want to say no. You tolerate things that upset you. You give energy you do not have. You ignore your own needs to avoid making others uncomfortable. And eventually, you become emotionally exhausted because no human being can endlessly abandon themselves without consequences. The tragedy of people-pleasing is this: the more you ignore your own needs, the more resentment grows inside you. But instead of expressing it, you suppress it. You smile while feeling angry. You stay silent while feeling hurt. You pretend to be okay while emotionally collapsing internally. And one day, you wake up realizing nobody truly knows the real you, because you spent your whole life becoming whatever other people wanted. Listen carefully. Kindness without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Real kindness includes yourself too, and self-respect begins the moment you realize this. You are not responsible for managing everyone's emotions. You are not required to constantly save people. You are not obligated to sacrifice your peace for approval. Some people will call you selfish when you finally protect your energy. But protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary, because if you constantly pour into others while ignoring yourself, eventually you become empty. And empty people cannot build meaningful lives. The strongest people are not those who please everyone. The strongest people are those who can disappoint others without betraying themselves. That is true emotional strength. Sign number 6. You abandon your goals and dreams easily. One of the clearest signs of lost self-respect is when you stop believing your future matters. You start settling, not because you are incapable, but because deep down you no longer believe you deserve greatness. So you quit early. You procrastinate constantly. You avoid challenges. You stay comfortable even when miserable. And slowly, your dreams begin dying in silence. This happens to millions of people, not because they lack talent, but because they lost belief in themselves long ago. A person with self-respect understands something powerful. Their life matters, their time matters, their potential matters, their future matters, so they fight for it, even when tired, even when afraid, even when progress is slow. But people who lose self-respect begin accepting lives they secretly hate. They convince themselves, this is enough, it's too late, I can't change, maybe this is all life is. But often, that is not truth, that is emotional defeat. And defeat becomes dangerous when it turns into identity, because eventually you stop trying completely. You stop taking risks, stop learning, stop growing, stop imagining a better future. You become physically alive, but mentally surrendered. Never allow life to reduce you to survival mode permanently. You were not born simply to wake up, scroll endlessly, feel anxious, and repeat the same empty routine every day. There is more inside you than that. But potential means nothing without action, and action becomes impossible when self-respect disappears. Because people fight hardest for things they believe are valuable. So if you no longer fight for your dreams, ask yourself honestly, have you stopped believing you are valuable too? That question changes lives, because rebuilding self-respect starts when you decide, my future is worth suffering for, and every meaningful life requires suffering. Discipline is suffering, growth is suffering, healing is suffering, but regret is far worse. One day, many people will look back and realize they abandoned their dreams, not because they failed, but because they stopped respecting themselves enough to continue. Do not become one of them. Sign number 7. You secretly hate being alone with yourself. This is perhaps the deepest sign of all. A person who loses self-respect often becomes addicted to distraction. Constant scrolling, constant noise, constant entertainment, constant conversations, constant stimulation. Why? Because silence forces confrontation. And many people are terrified of being alone with their own thoughts. The moment silence arrives, the truth appears, the regrets, the guilt, the insecurity, the emptiness, the self-disappointment. So instead of facing themselves, they escape into social media, into toxic relationships, into endless entertainment, into unhealthy habits, anything to avoid sitting quietly with their own mind. But distraction never heals pain, it only delays it, and eventually the mind becomes exhausted from running. Listen carefully. If you cannot sit alone peacefully, something inside you is asking for attention. Because inner peace is impossible without self-respect. A person who respects themselves does not need constant distraction to escape reality. They can sit in silence without fear. Not because life is perfect, but because they are no longer at war with themselves. That is true freedom. And sadly, many people spend years trying to fix external problems while ignoring the internal one destroying everything, their relationship with themselves. Because no amount of money, attention, relationships, or success can replace inner dignity. Without self-respect, even achievements feel empty. But with self-respect, even difficult lives carry meaning. Final message. If you recognized yourself in these signs, do not panic. Awareness is the beginning of transformation. The fact that you can see the problem means you are already waking up. And rebuilding self-respect does not happen overnight. It happens through small daily decisions. Keeping promises to yourself, creating boundaries, saying no when necessary, choosing discipline over excuses, walking away from disrespect, facing yourself honestly. Little by little, you rebuild your identity. And one day, you realize something powerful. You no longer need everyone to understand you, because for the first time in a long time, you finally respect yourself. And that changes everything. This is Habit Hustle. And remember, The world changes when a person stops abandoning themselves.